No more excuses. We're finally in the season to talk about one of my favorite Amouage fragrances ever. Hello, hello. Welcome back to Seldomly Often. I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is a practical review of Amouage Royal Tobacco. These reviews are for fragrances I have a lot of experience with, multiple wears in many situations, and I'm meant to give you a general idea of what it feels to wear the fragrance. As per usual, I do a lot of research before buying fragrances, but I don't really like to go into details about notes and accords, as I don't think that they help the end user. I'd rather talk about the wear experience as a whole. Many of you have been asking for it. We're finally talking about it. I've been teasing it long enough. Today, we're doing the review for Royal Tobacco. This is a little bit of a difficult review for me, so bear with me if I ramble a bit. For fragrances that I have a lot of emotional attachment to, for fragrances that I care a lot about, it's really difficult to come up with a review. Not because I don't know what to say, it's because I have almost too much to say, and I really want to make the fragrance justice. Many of you don't understand that having a fragrance channel like this means that when you put out a review for a fragrance, it's basically out there in the world forever. And unless you plan on revisiting it with future thoughts and opinions and a higher production quality, that is basically the benchmark for that fragrance. And for fragrances that are really meaningful, you really have to commit and say, okay, I'm ready to review this fragrance. This is what I have to say. This is my current production quality. So yeah, I'm gonna be courageous. I'm gonna be talking about Royal Tobacco, one of my favorite fragrances ever. It's also the right season to be talking about this scent. It's bitter cold here, and this is a very beautiful, warming, smoky, enveloping type of fragrance, perfect for winter months. As a lot of you may know, Amouage is pretty much my favorite brand. I discovered this house relatively early in my fragrance journey. It all started out with Interlude, specifically Interlude Woman. In that fragrance, even with the man, those two fragrances there are perfectly representative of what Amouage can do. It's the excitement of Amouage. And I personally really don't get people that start the Amouage experience with something like Reflection or Reflection 45. That is an amazing frag, yes, but it really doesn't represent Amouage in all its glory, in all its power, in all its excitement. Royal Tobacco to me is one of those fragrances that perfectly encapsulates what Amouage is capable of. It's a very, very exciting fragrance. It is a little bit reminiscent of the Interlude family just because of how smoky, how dense, and just how potent the thing is. The smokiness in here is very different actually from the Interlude family. And the smoky note in here to me is a characteristic of Royal Tobacco, and it's actually the component that I decided to base my comparisons on. Royal Tobacco is part of the library collection, and it's actually the second to last fragrance to come out in that line, the last one being King Blue. And I discovered this through the official sample kit of the library collection. A while back I got that sample kit and I started going through the fragrances. Most of the fragrances in the sample kit are actually really good, but two of them really struck a chord with me. One was Royal Tobacco, the other one was Silver Oud. Royal Tobacco was definitely and easily the most exciting from the sample kit, and when I first sprayed this in the air, my pupils immediately dilated. For whatever reason, this scent really triggers my nervous system, and every time I bring this thing to my nose, it's like a jolt of caffeine. It's so beautiful, it's so emotional. It really gives me a drive to do stuff. And it's so energetic, but it's also very dark and enveloping. It's so moody, so atmospheric. This is one of the best tobacco fragrances that I ever came across, and definitely my favorite tobacco fragrance. And although for many, the golden age of Amouage is the Christopher Chong era, which I can't really disagree with, this one here came out under the new creative director, perfumed by the very famous Cécile Zarokian. Cécile Zarokian is definitely one of those names that no one forgets to mention every time they review a perfume by her. She is very popular, she has a massive following on social media, and basically she's like a superstar perfumer at this point. Now, I also personally find a lot of her creations very interesting, very good. They're all very edgy, very creative. They have this aura around them. She made a ton of fragrances for Amouage. A lot of them are my favorites, like Royal Tobacco, like Silver Oud is another one from her. She also made Epic Woman and Epic 56. What else? There's Material, which I wasn't too fond of. But again, her signature, her definite style of approach is very noticeable and very detectable and recognizable. So while everyone else is bashing Renaud Salmon for how he is guiding the house and guiding the future of Amouage, I really have to tip my hat to him, because under his creative director, two of my favorite fragrances from Amouage came out, and I'm really thankful for that. The idea and concept behind Royal Tobacco is the connection between Cuba and Oman. Apparently these two locations are on the same parallel on the map, and Renaud Salmon and Cécile Zarokian really wanted to emphasize the differences in ingredients and really combine them into one. Royal Tobacco is all about the tobacco from Cuba, the cigars from Cuba, that smoky feeling that you get from Cuba, but also combining it with the typical frankincense from Oman in the typical Amouage style. While I personally think that the idea, the conceptualization, and the delivery to market of this fragrance is actually really cool and well executed, I'm not really getting a lot of Oman, a lot of Amouage in here. Your typical beautiful frankincense notes from Amouage is more noticeable in fragrances like Interlude, the Jubilation Family, Overture, and a lot of the oldies like Mythman and others. Royal Tobacco to me comes across as a little bit more modern, definitely more edgy and experimental in this regard. I really like this fragrance, but we're going to talk about the scent profile after we cover the presentation. Presentation for Amouage products is always a high point of the house. These bottles come across as heavy, well made, they're very luxurious, they're very, very beautiful and very refined. It is, after all, a very expensive house, a very luxurious, expensive house. But in this regard, I have to say that you kind of get what you pay for. The bottles from the library collection come in this ceramic coating, a very matte satin finish, very beautiful. The one thing I like about it is that it's very, very fingerprint resistant. I like the pastel tones. It's very elegant. It sits well on the shelf. The one thing that I don't like about the library collection presentation is that all of the fragrances look the same. It's really hard to tell them apart. They all have the same hue. They all have the same cap and contrast. The only two fragrances that stand out that actually have the colors of the cap and the bottle inverted are Silver Oud and King Blue. The cap for Royal Tobacco feels good. It's snappy, it's magnetic, it self-orients. It's heavy, it's well made, but in theme with the new Amouage Essences collection, this is not a metal cap. This is a plastic cap with some sort of a metal core to make it a lot more heavier. But it's unfortunately the reality of the library collection. They're all like this. So yeah, don't expect a metal cap. That's pretty much the only gripe that I have with the presentation. It still functions perfectly. It's still heavy and it still feels high quality, but still, it feels a little bit cheap. The atomizer assemblies for the Amouage bottles are pretty good. They're not those pressurized atomizers that you would find on something like Dior or even something like Mancera, but they're functional, they spray well, and they're a joy to use. Let's give it a couple sprays. Been wearing this fragrance as my scent of the day. It's absolutely incredible. Every time I spray it, I renew that massive opening that I'm going to talk about in a bit. It's incredible. So yeah, overall presentation is excellent. If you know Amouage, if you have a couple of bottles, especially if you have another library collection, this will not be new to you. It's very, very good. Easy to like, easy to love. Okay, it's time to talk about the scent profile for Royal Tobacco. What does this smell like? To me, Royal Tobacco is like the perfect, most romanticized version of a cigar, of cigarettes, of smoke. The smoke note in here, as I mentioned in my introduction, is very, very particular, very strong, very choking. This smoke note is present top to bottom and really accompanies the whole wear experience of this fragrance. So if you don't like smoke, this fragrance is probably not for you. The smoke note in here is, how would I put it? It's very dry, very bitter, choking, and almost acrid to a degree. It's your typical cigar or cigarette type of smoke. It's very harsh. It's very harsh on the olfactory system. It's very harsh on your lungs. Obviously, this fragrance never really goes to the lungs, but you almost feel that you're breathing in actual smoke. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of the written reviews online on Fragrantica and Profumo refer to this scent as smelling like an ashtray. I totally get that aspect. Now, if you're sensitive to smoke, you'll never get past this massive barrier that this fragrance puts up. But if you can tolerate that smoke, you start getting a lot of nuances in the back end. This fragrance is incredibly complex. There's so much stuff going on. It's so fun and so exciting to explore. Upon initial spray, I'm immediately greeted again by that smoke, but also by this massive licorice type of accord. And this is apparently a combination of aniseed and licorice root. Now, a lot of people say that this is green in tendency, and I do get it, but to me, it really resembles the actual licorice roots that kids chew on. I grew up on that stuff, and you just basically, there are these sticks which you put in your mouth, you just chew on, and they get very fibrous, very woody all of a sudden. And there's a huge wood aspect in that licorice to me. So yes, although this fragrance can come across as a little bit green and oily, because this fragrance is very oily, but I do think that that oily factor is not from the licorice. The licorice per se is a very dry, very woody type of licorice. It's sweet, but it has a very natural type of sweetness to it. There might be other spices in here. There are probably other spices. This is a very complicated fragrance, as I said, but I can't really pick them out in this massive smoke cloud dominated by this licorice flavor. The magical thing about the opening of this fragrance is that it's actually very light and airy. There's something almost mentholated hidden between that smoke. There's something which is almost balsamic to a degree. It hits your nostrils and it almost clears your nostrils. This otherwise would be a very heavy, very dense type of scent. This whole scent profile sits in the mid to base, so it's a very drony, very base heavy fragrance. The dryness, the bitterness, the acridness of this smoke combined with this sort of mentholated aspect are the only things that are kind of like lifting this fragrance up and just giving it a little bit of top presence. The opening of this fragrance, characterized by that licorice note and that harsh, airy smoke, is quite long lasting. I would say it lasts about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. This fragrance as a whole lasts a ton of time. But then the fragrance sort of transitions in its mid. The licorice note goes a lot more subtle and you start picking up on a lot of more nuances from the mid-tone. There's a lot of beautiful oily aspects that sort of like emerge from that smokiness. One of the immediate things that comes to mind in the mid, one of my favorite ingredients is actually birch tar. Birch tar has this really sticky, molasses, oily type of texture. It's black, it's dense, it's smoky, it's bitter and harsh. But the way it's placed in here, the way it's mixed in with these woods and tobacco leaves creates this sweet, warm, enveloping, almost choking charred smell. It's really beautiful, it's really dense, it sits like a low-hanging fog. This to me is a stage where the fragrance is most reminiscent of something like Interlude. So if you're familiar with that smokiness, with that deep choking smoke, that is the mid-tone of Royal Tobacco. As the fragrance evolves through the hours, as it's usually the case, also Royal Tobacco becomes a lot smoother. A lot of the harshness from the bitter smoke, a lot of the harshness from the licorice note and from those very tarry type of birch tar notes in the mid, just sort of like mellow out and fade out. In the backbone, you get this beautiful charcoal warmth. There's also a little bit of a vanilla, but this is not a sweet fragrance whatsoever. The vanilla is there just to kind of like smooth things out and just tie things together. The deep dry down to me is where the Omani frankincense is the most noticeable and where you can really tell that Royal Tobacco is part of the Amouage family. The last third of the life of the fragrance is where you can also tell that this is a Cécile Zerogan fragrance. Cécile Zerogan is very recognizable for her vanilla ambery type of glow in the bottom that she uses on most of her fragrances actually. Here it's not as noticeable or sweet like something like Material or even something like the newer Outlands, but it's still there, it's still present. It's her signature. I really like how this sweet ambery glow is implemented. It gives a little bit of relief from this otherwise very, very heavy, very choking fragrance. Although incredibly beautiful, evocative, and exciting, this fragrance can objectively be a little bit fatiguing to wear. It's just so intense. The smokiness is always there. If you spray this on your chest, beware, because you're going to be sniffing this really acrid smoke for hours and hours and hours. I tend to like it. I tend to not wear this every day. This is not my signature scent. This could not be my signature scent just because it would be a little bit too much, just too intense. But on the flip side, when I do wear it, it's just so massive. It's so difficult to ignore. It's such a wild ride. Speaking of wearing, let's talk about the practicalities for Royal Tobacco. This is not a versatile scent, period. First of all, we have to address the massive performance of this fragrance. It's incredibly long lasting and massively projecting. When you first spray this, you're basically filling rooms for the first hour, and the longevity on this is absolutely insane. I get 12 hours plus of wear, very, very strongly detectable, even down to the deepest dry down, just because of the notes. They're really foreign, they never really blend in with the skin. Wearing this fragrance is alone a huge commitment, which actually hurts versatility. This is because even if you want to wear this as a day scent, it's so potent, it's so in your face, that it becomes quite fatiguing and almost choking. You can't wash it off. You really have to take like 2 showers to get this thing off. The scent profile itself is also incredibly dark, deep, and heavy, and it doesn't really lend itself to day wear per se. I have worn this to the office multiple times just because I love it so much and I don't really care, but it is objectively a very, very difficult thing to wear at the office. When I do wear it, I keep it to 1-2 sprays max. If it's 2 sprays, I usually spray under my shirt. I just want to keep it as low-key as possible, and it's difficult to do. A frigid evening with a loud event is where this fragrance really shines. You can spray a lot of it, be a powerhouse of a presence within the crowd, This is definitely a head turner. It's beautiful. It requires confidence. It requires a sort of a presence. This is one of those fragrances that will wear you if you don't dress up, if you don't act accordingly. And this phrase about a fragrance wearing you is all about the volume and presence of the fragrance. It's like walking around with a massive dog. If you don't have control of that massive dog, that dog will be walking you, literally. And the same sort of situation applies to a fragrance like this. If you spray it on and you wear it and you're kind of self-conscious about how loud and present this thing is, it will not work out. It just won't. This needs a little bit more of a bold type of action. That's why I really recommend it for evening situations in loud environments. Surprisingly, loud volume really masks high fragrance because it kind of like blends in the chaos of everything. The scent per se is very edgy and experimental and goes very well casual to elegant. You don't really need to be dressed up for something like this, but it definitely goes well with a little bit more of an in-your-face type of outfit. If you want to wear a leather jacket, if you want to wear something a little bit flashy, this works well. Edginess of this scent really carries over to the intended demographic for this fragrance. Anyone can wear this and no one can wear this. I would say that potentially leans a little bit more masculine just because it's so smoky, it's so rich. But hey, I know girls and women that wear Black Afgano easily. I know girls and women that wear Interlude, Man. So by all means, if you like smoke, if you like tobacco, if you like a very strong type of acrid presence, you can wear this, no problem. It's just bold. It's bold for everyone, men and women. So yeah, just to top it off, versatility for Royal Tobacco is below average. I actually think that this is a good thing because in order for this to be a lot more wearable, it would have to be a lot more tame. And I actually like wearing fragrances like this every now and again. I like being excited. I like being carried around by something like this. I like being emotionally battered by a fragrance. It's a little bit fatiguing on day-to-day use, but when I want it, this hits the spot perfectly. All right, we're at the part of the video where I give you options for the reviewed fragrance. For Royal Tobacco, I decided to really embrace the smoky aspect. I have 3 options for you. The first one being the most direct comparison to Royal Tobacco. The first option is Café Tabac by Aedes de Venustas. This is an incredibly beautiful fragrance. It's reminiscent of Royal Tobacco in many ways, meaning that it has a lot of that choking, acrid type of smoke. It's a very realistic type of scent that represents cigars, it represents booze, it represents tobacco. But yeah, this is an absolutely beautiful fragrance, super long lasting, sort of the same vibe and use case as Royal Tobacco. It's just a little bit sweeter. This is a masterpiece by Bertrand Duchaufour. If you're interested in tobacco, if you're interested in Royal Tobacco, give this a chance, get a decant of this, especially if you live in the US. You really have no excuse not to sample Aedes de Venustas. This is a really good tobacco fragrance. My second recommendation is Comme de Garçons Black. This is a very different fragrance because it doesn't really have a tobacco note. This is smoky in the sense of like a smoky incense. This is a tarry, woody, smoky frag. And it's beautiful. I really like it. It has this airy aspect to it for whatever reason. It might be due to the fact that it's an eau de toilette, but it really lifts off the skin a lot more. This is way less sweet than Royal Tobacco. It does not have a licorice note. It does not have any sweet notes in there. It really resembles the smell of an extinguished fireplace with the last remaining burning embers. It's beautiful. It's actually quite affordable. So if you like dark fragrances, this to me is a must-have. You really can't go wrong with Comme de Garçons Black. Comme de Garçons is a unique, edgy, innovative house. A lot of their fragrances are really cool, really fun. I really suggest you get your nose on some of these. The last fragrance on my list is probably the one that departs the most from Royal Tobacco, but it still keeps a very smoky, very dark, very tarry type of vibe and concept. We're talking about Stephane Humbert Lucas Black Gemstone. This is an absolute masterpiece of fragrance. I really like it. I really enjoy wearing it. The longevity on this could be a little bit better just because the whole bulk of the fragrance is in the opening. This to me is a very monodirectional, one-dimensional type of fragrance. Not because it lacks complexity, absolutely not. But it has such a specific, such a defined purpose. This is definition of the color black itself. This to me is what a black hole would smell like. It's so dense, it's so endearing, it has such a huge gravity and pull to it. But again, it's very specific in what it does. It does only that. So the complexity all lies in a very restricted type of range. It's absolutely beautiful, and once you get your head into that black hole, you really start perceiving all these little minute facets of the color black. It's so deep, it's so dense, but at the same time, as quickly as a black hole forms, it poofs off and it evaporates off. The longevity of this, again, is not that great, but it's a wonderful, exciting experience every time I wear it. Okay, back to Royal Tobacco with my final recommendations. This fragrance is absolutely incredible. It is one of my favorites ever. Every time I wear it, it brings a smile to my face. It's so exciting. I really can't stress enough how exciting this fragrance is. Once again, you really need to like smoke. You really need to like a very bitter type of dry smoke. But if you can get past that, you have to get your nose on Royal Tobacco. This is absolutely not blind buy safe to any stretch of the imagination. You really have to sample it, give it a ton of wears, let it sink in, and really be honest with yourself. Are you even gonna wear something like this? Because that's the main question for Royal Tobacco. It's so not versatile that it's really hard to justify such an expensive fragrance in one's wardrobe. I do not regret this one bit. I really love this. I'll cherish this always and forever. It'll probably last me a lifetime because 2 sprays of this are plenty for a full day of wear. And yeah, to me, this is one of the greatest tobacco fragrances out there. It's massive, it's beautiful, it's potent, it's so bossy. And to me, this is what Amouage can do and should be doing moving forward. I hope I made this absolutely amazing fragrance some justice with this review. I still have some Amouage fragrances to cover in reviews, and they're probably my favorite in my collection. If you haven't seen my video where I rank all my Amouages, go check that out because that will give you a glimpse of what's coming. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to video, feel free to subscribe. It's always massively appreciated and it helps the channel. If you want to interact with me, feel free to leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. Never take it for granted. Many more reviews to come, many more videos to come. See you in the next one. Cheers.